At 8:30 in the morning on June 6, 1944, Lieutenant General Omar Bradley stood on the bridge of the heavy cruiser USS Augusta, staring through binoculars at what looked like the death of the American invasion. The lenses were streaked with salt spray, his view obscured at times by smoke drifting in from shore, but there was no mistaking what he saw. Omaha Beach was not a beachhead, it was a disaster unfolding in real time. Bodies floated in the surf, landing craft burned at the waterline. Dark shapes lay motionless on the sand where men had fallen moments after the ramps dropped. Those who had survived the crossing were pinned behind steel obstacles, pressed flat against the beach by German machine gun fire that had not slackened since dawn. From Bradley's position 8 miles offshore, it appeared that the assault had not stalled, it had failed. Only hours earlier, Bradley had told these men that naval bombardment would smash the German defenses before the first American touched French soil. He had assured them that the defenders were second-rate troops, older men, foreign conscripts, units lacking morale and combat effectiveness. He had promised that resistance would be scattered and short-lived. Now more than 2,000 Americans were dead or dying, and the general commanding all American ground forces in Normandy was forced to consider a decision no commander ever wants to face: evacuation. Pull the survivors off Omaha Beach, redirect follow-up waves to Utah Beach or into the British sector at Gold. Admit, privately at first, that the American assault had collapsed before it had truly begun. Bradley did not issue that order, but he thought about it. Later, he would admit just how close he came. What Bradley could not see, what he could not possibly know from his vantage point offshore, was that amid the chaos on that beach, leadership was emerging in unexpected places. Somewhere between the burning landing craft and the seawall, a 51-year-old general with a heart condition and a walking cane was about to change the course of the battle. British doubts about American soldiers existed long before the first wave hit the sand. Field Marshal Alan Brooke, the professional head of the British Army, kept a private diary throughout the war. In it, he recorded his unfiltered assessments of allies and enemies alike. Brooke respected American industrial power. He understood that American factories were producing tanks, aircraft, and ammunition on a scale Germany could never match. But soldiers were another matter. In Brooke's view, American troops lacked the hard-earned combat experience British units had gained fighting across North Africa, Sicily, and Italy. He worried that American generals did not fully grasp the professionalism of the German army or the brutal efficiency of German defensive warfare. This skepticism was not rooted in arrogance alone, it was shaped by experience. The British had watched the French army collapse in 6 weeks in 1940. They had evacuated their own forces from Dunkirk with their backs to the sea. They had lost Singapore, Greece, and Crete. They had learned, painfully, that modern war punished optimism and rewarded caution. By 1944, caution had become doctrine. The Americans, by contrast, arrived with confidence, abundance, and armies that had not yet faced a German division in a full-scale amphibious assault. To many British officers, that combination looked less like strength and more like dangerous naivety. Even Winston Churchill shared these concerns. As late as February 1944, 4 months before D-Day, he was still questioning the entire operation. Why risk everything on a frontal assault against the most heavily fortified coastline in Europe? Why not strike elsewhere? Norway, the Balkans, the Mediterranean? The British preference was attrition. bleed Germany down through bombing, peripheral campaigns, and Soviet pressure in the east. Only then, when German strength had been sufficiently reduced, should a cross-channel invasion be attempted. The Americans disagreed. General Marshall, the U.S. Army Chief of Staff, believed in concentration of force at the decisive point. Hit the enemy where it mattered most. End the war quickly. Stop the killing. That disagreement shaped every aspect of the invasion. The British wanted more time. The Americans wanted action. In the end, it was Stalin at the Tehran Conference in November 1933 who forced a decision. He demanded a firm invasion date. Outnumbered politically, Churchill agreed. June 6th would answer the question that had divided the Allies for years. The relationship between British and American forces in the months leading up to D-Day was shaped as much by history as by planning tables and maps. British officers had been fighting continuously since 1939. They had endured defeat in France, evacuation at Dunkirk, the terror of the Blitz, and hard-fought campaigns across North Africa, Sicily, and Italy. Entire divisions had been shattered and rebuilt. Friends and colleagues were gone. Lessons had been learned the hard way. American officers, by contrast, had entered the war only after December 1941. Many had not heard a shot fired in anger until North Africa in late 1942. Even those who had fought in Sicily and Italy were considered relatively inexperienced by British standards. This gap in combat history created friction. British officers often saw themselves as mentors. American officers often felt patronized. The alliance was real, but so were the tensions beneath it. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery embodied this complicated dynamic. He genuinely respected Dwight Eisenhower, the American general appointed Supreme Allied Commander. At the same time, Montgomery believed that his own experience made him better suited to command ground operations. In his view, American forces had potential, but they required British guidance to reach it. Omar Bradley, commanding American ground forces under Montgomery, felt that tension personally. Montgomery left me with the feeling that I was a poor country cousin whom he had to tolerate, Bradley later wrote. The remark was not bitterness, it was observation. The British saw the Americans as untested. Yet there was another side to British opinion. Montgomery toured American training camps in England during the spring of 1944. He spoke directly to American soldiers without notes, projecting confidence and clarity. The response surprised even his own staff. American troops cheered him when he arrived and cheered again when he left. Whatever Montgomery thought of American generals, he recognized something in American soldiers. They believed in their mission. They had crossed an ocean to fight for a continent they had never seen. The question was whether belief would survive first contact with German fire. The planning assumptions for Omaha Beach were flawed from the start. Allied intelligence believed the beach was defended primarily by the 716th Static Infantry Division. These were second-rate units, older men, foreign conscripts, troops deemed unfit for the Eastern Front. Resistance was expected to be light. What the planners did not know was that the 352nd Infantry Division had moved into the area in March. This was a veteran formation with experienced officers and non-commissioned leaders transferred from the Eastern Front. They were well-trained, well-equipped, and highly motivated. The intelligence failure was catastrophic. The plan also depended heavily on air and naval bombardment. Heavy bombers were supposed to crater the beach, destroying German defenses and creating cover for advancing infantry. Naval guns were meant to neutralize bunkers overlooking the waterline. Neither objective was achieved. Cloud cover on the morning of June 6th forced bomber crews to delay release to avoid hitting Allied ships. In those few seconds, the aircraft overshot their targets. Bombs fell harmlessly inland. German positions on the bluffs were largely untouched. The naval bombardment lasted only 40 minutes. Rear Admiral John Hall argued fiercely for hours of sustained fire. He was overruled. "It is a crime," he warned, "to send me on the biggest amphibious attack in history with such inadequate naval gunfire support." He was correct. Then were the tanks. The plan called for 32 amphibious Sherman DD tanks to land with the first wave. These tanks were supposed to provide immediate mobile firepower, but the English Channel was rough. 5-foot swells tore at the canvas flotation screens. In the eastern sector, 29 tanks were launched. 27 sank. Their crews drowned inside them. In the western sector, one tank commander refused to launch and ordered his vehicles delivered directly onto the sand. That decision saved lives. But across much of Omaha, infantry landed without armor, without effective air cover, and against a far stronger enemy than anyone had been told to expect. The killing began instantly. German machine gunners had registered their weapons on the waterline. They knew exactly where landing craft would drop their ramps. When the steel doors opened, bullets poured in. Men were cut down before they could move. Others jumped into water over their heads, dragged down by equipment, drowning within yards of shore. Those who reached the sand found no cover. The bomb craters they were supposed to shelter in did not exist. Company A of the 116th Infantry Regiment, part of the 29th Division, landed directly in front of a German strongpoint. Within 10 minutes, it suffered 96% casualties. Of more than 200, fewer than 20 reached the seawall alive. By 8:30 a.m., the official plan called for American troops to be a mile inland. They were 10 yards from the water. Pinned between rising tide and relentless fire, men hugged the sand, shocked, wounded, or praying. Behind them was the sea. Ahead lay open ground, a seawall, marsh grass, and steep bluffs crowned with German bunkers. Every inch was covered by interlocking fields of fire. It was here, amid the wreckage of a failed plan, that leadership would decide the fate of Omaha Beach. Brigadier General Norman Cota came ashore at Omaha Beach at approximately 7:30 a.m., nearly an hour after the first assault waves had landed. He was 51 years old, the assistant division commander of the 29th Infantry Division, and one of the highest-ranking American officers to step onto the sand that morning. His landing craft took machine gun fire on the approach. 3 soldiers were killed as they exited the ramp. Cota stepped into chaos. He had opposed the daylight landing from the very beginning. During planning conferences, Cota argued repeatedly for a pre-dawn assault. Tactical surprise, he believed, offered the best chance of success. A night landing would reduce the effectiveness of German machine guns and artillery and disrupt defensive coordination. His superiors disagreed. Naval and air bombardment, they insisted, would neutralize German defenses. The enemy would be inexperienced and demoralized. Cota's opposition was not pessimism, it was analysis. Before D-Day, he had served as an American advisor to the Combined Operations Division in the European theater. He had studied amphibious warfare extensively. He understood exactly what could go wrong. At a conference on landing assaults in 1943, Cota made his position clear. Tactical surprise is one of the most powerful factors in determining success, he told assembled officers. I favor the night landing. I do not believe the daylight assault can succeed. Other senior commanders shared his view. Major General Leonard Jarrow, commander of V Corps, argued the same. So did Rear Admiral John Hall, responsible for naval forces at Omaha. All were overruled. The decision-makers believed bombardment would compensate for the loss of surprise. Standing on a beach littered with the dead and wounded, Kota knew they had been wrong. He did not freeze, he did not crawl. He stood upright and began moving across the beach as if German bullets could not touch him. Soldiers pressed flat against the sand stared in disbelief as the general walked past them, exposed to fire that pinned entire companies in place. Kota moved from group to group, shouting orders, kicking stunned men into motion, pointing toward the bluffs. He did not offer comfort, he offered direction. Near the seawall, he encountered men from the 5th Rangers, pinned down and taking fire. He asked their unit identification. "5th Rangers," someone shouted back. Kota's response became legend. "Well then, God damn it, Rangers, lead the way." The phrase would later become the official motto of the U.S. Army Rangers. On June 6, 1944, it was not a slogan, it was an order. The Rangers at Omaha were elite troops, volunteers who had endured brutal training for special operations. Many had been assigned to assault Point de Hoc, the cliff overlooking the beach where German artillery was believed to threaten the invasion fleet. Some Rangers had already accomplished one of the most daring actions of the day by scaling those cliffs under fire. But other Ranger elements, including parts of the 2nd and 5th Battalions, had been diverted to Omaha when communications broke down. They landed expecting to move inland quickly, and instead found themselves trapped in the same killing zone as the infantry. Training mattered little when machine gun fire skimmed inches above your head. What Kota provided was leadership by example, a man willing to walk where others crawled, a man willing to absorb risk so others would move. A soldier nearby carried a Bangalore torpedo, a long tube packed with explosives designed to clear wire obstacles. Kota ordered it placed against the wire blocking the route up the bluff. The explosion tore open a breach. The first man through was shot dead by a sniper. The men behind him froze. Kota did not. He stepped into the gap himself and began climbing. When he looked back, soldiers were following him. At first, a few, then more. Across Omaha Beach, similar moments were unfolding. Small groups of soldiers, cut off from their units, led by sergeants, lieutenants, and privates, made the same decision. Staying meant death. Moving forward offered at least a chance. Colonel George Taylor, commander of the 16th Infantry Regiment, summarized the situation with brutal honesty. "There are two kinds of people who are staying on this beach, those who are dead and those who are going to die. Now let's get the hell out of here." By early afternoon, American troops were pushing inland at multiple points, not according to plan, not in formation, but they were moving. The beach was no longer just a killing ground, it was becoming a foothold. By late morning on June 6th, Omaha Beach remained on the edge of collapse. From offshore, reports reaching USS Augusta painted an unrelenting picture of chaos. American units were fragmented, casualties were staggering, progress inland was measured in yards, not miles. For hours, the situation appeared unsalvageable. It was at this moment that the Navy made a decision that would prove decisive. When Omar Bradley began weighing evacuation, Rear Admiral Alan Kirk, commander of the Western Naval Task Force, asked a simple question: could naval gunfire do more? The answer, delivered without hesitation by officers closer to the shore, was yes, but only if the ships were willing to accept extreme risk. Destroyers that had withdrawn after the initial bombardment turned back toward the coast. They closed the distance until they were less than 800 yards from the beach, operating in water so shallow they risked running aground at any moment. The German defenders could see them, so could their artillery. The destroyer captains did not hesitate. From the battleship USS Texas, Rear Admiral Carleton Bryant transmitted a blunt order that would be remembered long after the war. "Get on them, men, get on them. They are raising hell with the men on the beach, and we cannot have any more of that." The destroyers responded with everything they had. They fired point-blank into German positions along the bluffs, aiming directly at visible muzzle flashes, bunker embrasures, and machine gun nests that aerial bombardment had missed. Some ships fired until their barrels overheated. Others expended nearly their entire ammunition load. Crews adjusted fire manually, often without precise coordinates, trusting spotters and instinct. The effect was immediate. German strongpoints that had dominated the beach since dawn were silenced one by one. Bunkers cracked, machine guns fell silent. The constant, murderous fire that had pinned Americans to the sand began to break. Colonel Stanhope Mason, Chief of Staff of the 1st Infantry Division, later credited the Navy with making survival possible. He said, "I am firmly convinced that our supporting naval fire got us in. Without the gunfire, we positively could not have crossed the beaches." But gunfire alone did not win Omaha. Men did. As naval shells shattered German defenses from above, American infantry exploited the openings. Small groups climbed the bluffs, flanked positions, and attacked bunkers from the rear. German defenders who had dominated the beach from prepared positions suddenly found Americans behind them. By late afternoon, Omaha was no longer a killing field. It was a fragile beachhead, narrow and costly, but real. 15 miles west, a different American general demonstrated a different kind of leadership. Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt, Jr. was 56 years old, the oldest man to land on D-Day, and the only general officer to go ashore with the first wave. He walked with a cane, suffering from arthritis and a serious heart condition he had concealed from Army doctors. He had requested permission to land with assault troops 3 times. Twice he was denied. The third request, submitted in writing, was reluctantly approved. His commanding officer, Major General Raymond Barton, signed the approval expecting Roosevelt would die on the beach. Roosevelt believed otherwise. In his written request, he explained his reasoning clearly. He wrote, "The force and skill with which the first elements hit the beach and proceed may determine the ultimate success of the operation. I believe I can contribute materially by going in with the assault companies." Roosevelt landed on Utah Beach, in the wrong place. Strong currents carried the first wave nearly 2,000 yards south of its intended landing zone. Many officers would have tried to correct the error under fire. Roosevelt did not. He surveyed the area calmly, then made a decision that saved hundreds of lives. "We'll start the war from right here," he announced. Instead of forcing troops to move laterally along the beach under fire, Roosevelt ordered them to advance inland from their actual position. He personally reconnoitered German defenses, walking through fire to identify safe routes. He stood at the water's edge, directing subsequent waves, calmly assigning units new objectives as they arrived. Roosevelt's son, Captain Quentin Roosevelt II, landed that same morning on Omaha Beach. They were the only father and son pair to land on D-Day. Years later, when asked to name the single most heroic action he had ever seen in combat, Omar Bradley answered without hesitation, "Ted Roosevelt on Utah Beach." Roosevelt received the Medal of Honor for his actions.
He died of a heart attack 5 weeks later, still in Normandy, still with his men. He never learned he was decorated.
While Americans fought for survival on Omaha and maneuvered inland at Utah, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery was watching events unfold with intense focus. As commander of all Allied ground forces on D-Day, Montgomery's primary concern was not only American success, but the stability of the entire invasion front. Failure on either American beach would expose the British flank and threaten the entire operation. Early reports from Omaha were alarming. Montgomery knew that Omar Bradley was considering evacuation. He also understood that pulling American forces off one beach and redirecting them to another would create chaos that could doom the invasion entirely. The logistical and command confusion alone might unravel months of planning. Montgomery considered contingencies. If Omaha failed completely, he explored the possibility of diverting American V Corps through Gold Beach, filtering them through the British sector to preserve momentum. But that option depended on British success, and British success was not guaranteed. At Gold Beach, the British 50th Infantry Division, the Northumbrians, landed under heavy fire. These were veteran troops who had fought in North Africa and Sicily. Their assault was methodical, conducted according to doctrine refined through years of combat. Infantry advanced alongside tanks. Artillery and naval gunfire suppressed German positions. Progress was steady but costly. At Sword Beach, the British 3rd Infantry Division landed with the objective of capturing Caen, the largest city in the invasion area. Caen was supposed to fall on D-Day. It did not. German resistance was fierce, and the arrival of the 21st Panzer Division launched a counterattack that threatened to split the British beachhead in two. Only the arrival of airborne reinforcements stabilized the situation. By nightfall, Montgomery's carefully constructed timetable was in ruins. None of the major objectives assigned for June 6th had been fully achieved. Yet the beaches held. And crucially, so did the Americans. The contrast between British and American operations was stark, but not simple. British advances were disciplined and doctrinal. American operations, particularly on Omaha, were chaotic to the point of near collapse. The American chain of command disintegrated within minutes of landing. Units were scattered. Officers were killed early. Planned coordination vanished. What replaced doctrine was improvisation. Small groups formed spontaneously. Sergeants led platoons composed of strangers. Privates made decisions normally reserved for officers. Movement inland occurred not because of orders from above, but because individuals decided that advancing offered a better chance of survival than staying pinned on the beach. British observers found this both alarming and impressive. British Army doctrine emphasized discipline, adherence to plan, and coordinated movement. You executed the plan because the plan represented accumulated experience. American training, particularly among National Guard and draft divisions, was less rigid. When plans failed, Americans were more willing to discard them entirely and improvise. This difference was not always an advantage. In Normandy's hedgerow fighting, it initially caused confusion and unnecessary losses. But on Omaha Beach, where the plan had failed completely, improvisation was essential. The 29th Infantry Division, a National Guard unit composed largely of men from Maryland and Virginia, bore the brunt of Omaha's slaughter. By British standards, these were green troops, clerks, farmers, factory workers, not professional soldiers. Their division symbol, a blue and gray yin and yang, represented former enemies united, reflecting their origins in states that had fought on opposite sides of the American Civil War.
They were not supposed to succeed. Alongside them, the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, brought combat experience from North Africa and Sicily. The plan assumed their veterans would stiffen the National Guardsmen. In practice, veterans died just as fast as newcomers. German bullets made no distinction. Yet something extraordinary happened. Under conditions that should have shattered any force, Americans kept attacking, not as a coherent army, but as dozens of small, determined groups. They crawled, climbed, and charged positions that logic said were impregnable. They did not win through elegance or superior tactics. They won through stubbornness. British officers watching the battle were forced to reassess their assumptions. The Americans had not fought beautifully. They had not followed doctrine. They had absorbed losses that British commanders would have considered unacceptable. And yet, they had taken the beach. Montgomery personally awarded Norman Cota the Distinguished Service Order, one of Britain's highest decorations for gallantry. It was rarely given to foreign officers. The citation recognized Cota's leadership under fire and his role in rallying shattered units and leading them off the beach. This was not ceremonial courtesy. It was institutional acknowledgement. Other British decorations followed. American officers and enlisted men received British honors for actions on D-Day. The skepticism that had shaped British attitudes towards American forces did not vanish, but it changed. The question was no longer whether Americans could fight, it was how they fought. The German perspective confirmed the shift. Defenders at Omaha Beach reported astonishment at American persistence. German machine gunners watched wave after wave of landing craft arrive. They watched Americans walk into fire, fall, and then be replaced by more men who kept coming. The German defense should have held. They had obstacles, interlocking fire, artillery support, and experienced troops. By every conventional measure, Omaha should have been a victory. Instead, it became something else, a warning. The German defenders at Omaha Beach did not fail because they lacked courage, preparation, or firepower. They failed because they ran out of something they had never planned to lose first: confidence. Their defensive doctrine assumed that sufficient casualties would break any assault. Every army has a limit. Every unit has a point where losses become intolerable and men refuse to advance further. The Germans believed they had reached that point within the first hour. They were wrong. Individual American soldiers broke. Entire units disintegrated. Men froze in shock or died where they stood. But others stepped forward. Not because they were ordered to, not because they understood the situation, but because moving forward felt better than waiting to die. This refusal to accept defeat, irrational, costly, and relentless, shattered German expectations. German machine gun teams began to experience a problem they had not anticipated. Ammunition consumption exceeded resupply. The volume of fire required to keep Americans pinned down was enormous, and as hours passed, belts ran low. Meanwhile, American naval fire grew increasingly accurate. Destroyers crept closer to shore, firing point-blank into bunkers. Positions that had dominated the beach at dawn were silenced by mid-afternoon. One German defender, Heinrich Severloh, manning a machine gun at Widerstandsnest 62, later claimed to have fired more than 13,000 rounds that day. While historians question the exact number, there is no doubt he inflicted terrible casualties. He watched Americans fall in heaps. He watched the attack falter. For hours he believed the defense would hold. Then it didn't. By evening, the German 352nd Infantry Division had lost nearly 20% of its strength. It had no reserves. The positions that had seemed invulnerable at dawn were collapsing under pressure from small American units that should not have survived. The failure to stop the landings sent a shock through German command in Normandy. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had warned of this exact outcome. The war would be decided on the beaches, he told his officers. If the Allies established a foothold, Germany would lose the war. The Allies established a foothold. For the British, June 6th forced a recalibration. American soldiers had taken casualties that would have broken many veteran formations. American generals had led under conditions that defied planning assumptions. British skepticism had not been entirely misplaced. American plans had failed spectacularly, but American adaptability had compensated for that failure. Field Marshal Alan Brooke continued to criticize American tactics in his diary throughout the Normandy campaign. He believed they attacked too broadly, expended resources wastefully, and relied too heavily on brute force. Some of these criticisms were valid, but alongside them he recorded growing respect. The Americans learned quickly, they adapted, they did not repeat mistakes indefinitely. The alliance changed on June 6th. Before D-Day, British commanders treated Americans as junior partners who required guidance. After D-Day, that attitude became harder to maintain. The Americans had proven themselves under the worst possible conditions. They had taken a fortified beach against veteran defenders with inadequate support and impossible odds. This did not erase tensions. Montgomery continued to clash with American commanders. Strategic disagreements persisted, but respect replaced doubt. As the campaign progressed, American strength grew while British manpower declined. By 1945, American forces dominated the Western Front numerically. British commanders adjusted accordingly. The alliance evolved from mentorship into partnership. By August 1944, American forces broke out of Normandy during Operation Cobra. By September, Paris was liberated. By March 1945, American armies crossed the Rhine into Germany. British contributions remained vital: intelligence, deception, armor, and experience, but the balance had shifted. The alliance that won the war was forged in blood on Omaha Beach. Norman Cota survived Normandy and later commanded the 28th Infantry Division during the Battle of the Bulge. He retired quietly, rarely speaking about D-Day. His obituary mentioned his service, but not the moments that defined it. Those who followed him remembered differently. They remembered a general walking upright through machine gun fire. They remembered his voice cutting through chaos. They remembered choosing to follow him because standing still meant death. Efforts to upgrade Cota's Distinguished Service Cross to the Medal of Honor continue, slowed by time and bureaucracy. But medals were never the point. Memory was. Above Omaha Beach stands the Normandy American Cemetery, 9,389 graves carved into white stone. They mark men who died taking a beach that should not have been taken, men who proved that plans can fail and still be overcome, that armies can break and still win. The British generals who doubted the Americans watched them fight and adjusted their judgments accordingly. Churchill praised them. Brooke recorded respect alongside criticism. Montgomery decorated them. The alliance was never perfect, but on June 6, 1944, under fire that killed thousands, it proved strong enough to win the war. And Omaha Beach became the place where doubt died and respect was born.